Hello, this is Kyle Jones with the Fullness of Meaning Christian Ministries, where we do exegete the Bible from the original Hebrew and Greek, do go to extant sources only to return again to the Bible to create a fuller nest of meaning. Well, today we are continuing our study on the idea of line and reason, or name. And if I could justify what I just said, line being in the procession of a genealogy, or your genetic structure from your parents, that is, your parentage. Reason was a Latin word, ratio, meaning the ration or the ratio from you to something or something to you. So the reason, the ration, the apportionment, apparatio of the ration in the Greek, would be the sonship as he inherited from his parents, or the daughter who inherited the line of her parents, some type of inheritance, and that means intellectually speaking, spiritually speaking, and tangibly speaking, such as property, locale, location, real estate. Which brings another good point that we will discuss in the genealogies. Well, today we're going to stick in the Bible as much as possible. I will read from the book of Matthew concerning genealogy, the genealogy to Christ, and to explain the power of genealogy, genetics, line, reason, name. The beginning of our lecture it started off in the study of the anatomy of the will in the book of Cradlus, another linkage, if you will, to our lectures, where the argument was between Hermogenes and Cradlus as they employed Socrates to reconcile if name, the word name, means something that is supernatural. That do names come about through a supernatural convention of a deity, or are they made by convention of man, such as Bob, Tom, Joe, to name something? It doesn't mean what you call something. Whatever something is named, that's just as good as the next thing. And I think that's exactly what our problem is today in social relativism, that we can just call anything by anything. And nothing has any line or reason anymore. And it is the line and reason I believe, is the inward mechanic that we have lost. That is something that has gone away from the relationship between us and God, and our understanding of languages and what God was saying to us in the original Hebrew and Greek. So the argument from the Cradlus perspective was, are names given by social convention, Bob, Tom, Joe, Smith, whatever, or are they created by a natural means that have just always been? That would be Dr. Maria Gimbutas's argument that water, let's say the M sign, was seen as waves. It was also seen as the way the mouth would work to say that the name Ma even means in many older languages, such as Old Chinese, Hebrew, and Arabic, to mean water. Ma'im, Ma, the old first prototype word for water, and even giving birth. The meander and chevron culture of the Baltics of, say, 35,000 BC were given to us to mean the sign of mother, birth giving, if you will, and water. So that's a natural convention, if you will. And then the supernatural convention would be argued by Plato that things were given by name of a supernatural order to establish the sense of line and reason. And we do have in the Bible, in Genesis, the account of God giving Adam the ability to name animals by their function, by their verbal force, which is, of course, how we look at God, by his verbal action upon us. So the ultimate answer for me is that that line and reason and name and authority and genealogy does come from God. So it is supernatural. Names, language, is a supernatural thing brought into the world, brought into entropy in one sense, but also in taking it seriously, can defy entropy if we hold to the words of their meaning. And that's what I believe this ministry does. We go back to the meaning of the words that the Bible has contained for us in a time capsule, Hebrew and Greek. And if we hold to the social structure as how these words were used in their semiotic nature, that means the social structure, how they spoke to each other, I believe that we can recover that supernatural force of these names, versus just saying that they're social conventions. They're just simply just a subjective, relevant, thing today. Okay, so all of that to be said, we are going to go into the genealogies of Christ to find a stronger, more forceful reason than even what I gave to the power of name. Okay, Matthew chapter 1, verse 1. The book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Now, already, Matthew has given us a genealogy that relates to the Jews. Okay? Now, the Jews respected line genealogy by their patriarchs. Obviously, King David was the proto king. Actually, Saul was. But King David was the first righteous king who honored God and lived out his life in honoring him. So we have the Magon David, the Star of David, as the emblazon for Israel on the flag today. And we might look into a further study of the candelabra, the eyes of the Lord, the 7 golden candlesticks. These are the eyes of God and his judgment upon the earth. Good or bad, right? And we covered the judgment of the Sepah. So anyway, the book of genealogies, or the Toledoth in the Hebrew, which we've covered, meaning the line of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, that would have linkage to the kingly line of Israel, the son of Abraham. Now, obviously, we're people in between Abraham and King David. Abraham was prior to Judaism. Abraham was prior to Israel. Okay? He was prior to Isaac, which means that this was a man coming out of a pagan lot. And so through Abraham shall all receive salvation. So we're talking about a call to the pagan nations now. So we're not referring to the line of Israel when we talk about Abraham. We're talking to a man that was outside of that line at that point. Abraham was the father of Isaac, and Isaac the father of Jacob, and Jacob the father of Judah and his brothers, and Judah the father of Perez, and Zerah by Tamar, and Perez the father of Hezron, and Hezron the father of Ram, and Ram the father of Amminadab, and Amminadab the father of Nahshon, and Nahshon the father of Salmon, and Salmon the father of Boaz, by Rahab, and Boaz the father of Obed, and that is by Ruth, and Obed the father of Jesse, and Jesse the father of David, or Dawid, the king. And this is our kingly line, we said. And David was the father of Solomon, by the wife of Uriah, and Solomon the father of Rehoboam, and Rehoboam the father of Abijah, and Abijah the father of Asaph. Now, in these lines, we're using the egenesin word in the Greek, the father of. So egenesin is the word genes. It means genetically speaking. We're having a genetic link here. We do use on occasion here the genitive article tou to us, the to refer to the son of, but we'll see this later. But nonetheless, we're using this genetic linkage word, engenesin in the Greek. So the father of, if you will, Rehoboam, the father of Abijah, and Abijah, the father of Asaph, and Asaph the father of Jehoshaphat, and Jehoshaphat the father of Joram, and Joram the father of Uzziah, and Uzziah the father of Jotham, and Jotham the father of Ahaz, and Ahaz the father of Hezekiah, and Hezekiah the father of Manasseh, Manasseh the father of Amos, and Amos the father of Josiah, and Josiah the father of Jeconiah, and his brothers, at the time of the deportation to Babylon, which is in 586. There were 3 deportations of southern Judah at this point into Babylon. And after the deportation to Babylon, we have Jeconiah was the father of Shealtiel, and Shealtiel was the father of Zerubbabel, and Zerubbabel was the father of Abiud. Abiud the father of Eliakim, and Eliakim the father of Azor, and Azor the father of Zadok, and Zadok the father of Achim. These are the priests, and Achim the father of Eliud, and Eliud the father of Eleazar, and Eleazar the father of Mathan, and Mathan the father of Jacob, and Jacob the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary, of whom Jesus was born, who was called Christ. So all of the generations from Abraham to David were 14 generations. And from David to the deportation to Babylon, 14 generations. And from the deportation to Babylon to the Christ, 14 generations. Okay, now, and it does discuss right here, the next verse 18 of chapter 1. Now, the birth of Christ, Jesus, took place in this way. When his mother Mary had been betrothed to Joseph, before they came together, she was found to be with child from the Holy Spirit. Now, let me ask you the question. What does that mean to this line, this lineage? Therefore, if we go from Joseph, from Joseph, the husband of Mary, straight to Christ being born. Did it say, genetically speaking, that he had linkage with Jesus? Well, it does not. And it does say, though, that Mary had linkage, genetically speaking. So we have a Toledoth in the Greek from Mary, the husband of Mary, of whom Jesus was born. It refers to Mary's engenesin. Now, the whole other time, it had been referring from father to son. So we have in the Greek, it's hard to see that in the English, but in the Greek, the usage of engenesin, meaning the genetic allotment. Now, a few things right here before I get to Luke that will answer for Matthew, and I probably won't have time this week to get to Luke, but Luke is going to answer for this genetic line, that it was from Mary, that Joseph was put into the family structure, but he was really the adopted one into this genetic line, and that we had to cover from the force of Matthew a formula that Christ was a part of the kingly line. He was also fused with the pagan generations that would be saved line of Abraham. We also have to understand that the genealogies answered for the real estate allotments. This is also kind of like the Domesday Book. It's the allotments of family tribes as to their place. And if we don't have genetic linkage, we don't have real estate allotment. And we'll discuss this later too. So there's a beautiful matrix that Matthew has put together in a formula to answer for and to a real estate allotment. Now, when I did a 10-week series on the birth of Christ using the reference to the stars, I discussed that Matthew also wrote in terms of constellations, of a constellar treatment. So there is a formula that we'll go into a little bit later in Matthew, believe it or not, that fits to the formula of an astrologer, a true astrologer, not the kind of like what's your sun sign, but the one who studied the stars, the astrologician. Now, I think I'm going to call it quits on the genealogies for today. We have a lot to answer for, but I want you to get your excitement built up on. We're going to go back and look at some of the things that were said in code or in formula, if you will, in the book of Matthew that just simply answer to themselves. Okay, I wrote out real quickly here just a little side addendum before I end this lecture. I was reading some of Dr. Kay Stendhal's work on the book of Matthew, and there was a section called Quis et und, and he was referring to name. We're studying name and genealogy. And the ultimate question in our society is, number one, hello, I'm Kyle. How are you doing? What's your name? You're appellate, right? And also, where do you live? What do you do? Well, the question is, quis et und is a Latin phrase to say, what is your name and where are you from? And this work was done on the genealogy of Christ and where he came from. Whence was he from? Well, the Bible in the book of Matthew and Luke tell us that the questions answer. Quis et und. Where do you come from? Who are you? What is your name? And that is the ultimate question. We default back to that question even in our day. What is your name? Hello, I'm Kyle. And well, what do you do? And where do you live? And so in the fullness of meaning, Christian ministries, our whole point is just to find the ultimatum, the ultimate thing. Well, the ultimate language would be the language that was used during the time of Christ as he fulfilled all things. Later, language defaulted. Prior to Christ, all language, I believe, this ministry believes, was being developed under God's sovereignty to that poignant Kairos time that in the fullness of time, in the fullness of meaning, these words would have their ultimate usage during the days of Christ, as Christ spoke. So this is a very beautiful work that you could read if you'd like, but he did discuss name and meaning as well as what we are doing. I'd also like to finalize this with a wonderful treatment by a guy named Werner Jaeger. Now, he wrote 3 tremendous books on what they call paideia. You might have heard of the young Padawan, the studiers, the students of the great the yogis of Star Wars, or the Jedis, and I believe that the Yetis have a strong, significant linguistic root too. But I won't go into that. I won't speak necessarily for the author of Star Wars, but he quite drew frequently from a lot of the Christian, Jewish, and some of the Arabic terms for great teachers, great masters. Anyway, the paideia, though, has to do, this is another work by the way, the first work, volume 1 of Werner Jaeger's paideia, had to do with the Greek culture and how that they taught the youth, the podos, the pediatrics, if you will. The word pediatrics comes from a doctor who works on young children. This is paideia 2. I actually have 3, excuse me. I had to write it on the side, but he's got 3. And the second work was the paideia, but it was called Early Christianity and Greek Paideia by Werner Jaeger. And it's a smaller treatment, but it's a brilliant treatment, which I have set a theme that I believe that the greatest philosophers of all time were the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd century philosophers that were Christian, who took the entire the body, the works of Aristotle, and particularly Plato, and incorporated them into the fullness of meaning Christianity, the fullness of meaning Christ, as how he answered to the Greeks, how he answered to what was logos by Plato's terminology. And if you go back to the studies of Plato, you find that Plato was saying, if logos is God, and it must be, then we have a fix that logos would have ordered all things and put all things in their classification and their order, and collocated all things and made everything have meaning. Well, that's what the book of John 1, starts off with, as answering in paideia to the children, us, the little children, what the logos was of Plato in reality, as it was actuated in Christ Jesus. But if I could, let me make a beautiful statement from this. He says, the question how this Christian form of Greek paideia, that's how the early 1st, 2nd, 3rd centuries for sure, Christian culture taught their children the Greek classics and into a Christian form. But the question how this Christian form of the Greek paideia affected the Latin world, the Roman world, concerns us immediately, he says. The details of this great process are to a large extent still unexplored, but they can be pursued through the Middle Ages. And from this Renaissance, the line leads straight back to the Christian humanism of the fathers of even the 4th century, which would be in the 300s and even into the 400s AD. And to their idea of man's dignity and of his reformation and rebirth through the Spirit. It is true that the secularization of medieval man is one of the most frequently stressed characteristics of the Italian civilization of the 15th century. But with the Greeks who immigrated after the fall of Constantinople in 1453, there came to Italy the whole literary tradition of the Byzantine East and the works of the Greek fathers. That means the early Greek, that's Plato, Aristotle, and even into the Greek New Testament Christians. These were brought in as the choicest part of this influx of immigration. Their influence on the thought of the Renaissance, that means the renewal of the child's mind, if you will, as a child, the rebirth. That's what the ultimate word means, of course, the rebirth. Both in Italy and throughout Europe is still largely an unsolved problem. But the number of manuscripts of their works in the library collections of that period, surpasses by far those of classical authors. Okay, now I'm going to stop right there. This is beautiful. What Mr. Yeager is saying is that he believes that the Renaissance, that means the ultimate Superman, if you will, the idea of let's go to the highest form of art that we can touch the face of God. Let's study the classics of poetry, of literature, of music, and let's push past the veil to God. That very well was the force of that was driven by the early Christian scholars that brought forth that thinking that ultimately immigrated into Europe in 1453, and that though medievalism and even some of the secular thought that was coming into this era in Europe was there. The pervading thought force was probably linked back to the paideia, the teaching of reason through the classics of Plato and Aristotle into this early 1st century. And I say that to say that line and reason comes through the genealogy of the fathers of the Old Testament into Christ, and still to this day, line and reason, your ration, your reason, your sanity will continue if we have linkage with the meaning, the fullness of meaning of the words of the New Testament and the Old Testament in the Hebrew and Greek, and that we can continue and we can actually deny entropy as our culture falls. We will hold to the classics and how they were completely reformed in Christian work, such as called the Bible. Well, this is Kyle Jones with the Fullness of Meaning Christian Ministries. I thank you for your time.